Hello, 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 and welcome. It's so lovely to see you all here today. I'm so grateful you're here. Hello to all the people we know and love, and also to all the people that we are here to meet today. And thank you so much for Elise for staying up so late and still being compass mentis. And to Makati.
So you think?
And to Makati for facilitating us today. It's so lovely to see people from Johannesburg, Cape Town, Narayan, where are you? Toronto or Vancouver? Toronto. Welcome.
Toronto.
Simon in Bath, James in Joburg, I don't know where Dina and Kai, where you are, Andrea in Cape Town, and Jake in Virginia. So lovely to see you all and welcome. Hi. So I'm going to hand you over to Makati, who's down the road in Cape Town, who's going to take control of the processes for today.
Oh, control.
Control.
Good afternoon, everybody from beautiful sunny Cape Town. And yes, I live in that part of South Africa where the weather does make a difference. It has to be mentioned. And it is such a pleasure to see all of you, to be spending this precious 1 hour with you and with Julia and with Alice. On this topic of vertical development in leadership. Before I get there, though, let me introduce myself and say a tiny little bit about me. Yes, Julia?
No, I was doing, that's where Kai's from. She's from Singapore. Sorry. Impressive, should I? Hi, Tina.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, my name is Makati. And I am a seeker, I am a pilgrim, I am here in this world seeking to experience my own wholeness through different interactions, through living my life as close to me as possible, and finding ways of removing all the obstructions that hide me from me. And my work, my offering in the world is about that. How do we take that journey towards finding who we really are beyond the stories that get placed upon us of conditioning and programming? And I'm going to give over to you, Alice, to introduce yourself, and then it'll be over to you, Julia, to also introduce yourself.
Yeah, you said it so beautifully and so poetically that I feel that whatever I say next will sound very mundane. But I'm Alice in my native Romanian. I'm a bit of an in-betweener, both culturally. I'm originally from Romania. I have a Greek name and I live in Australia, which has been our home for a few years now. And I spend a lot of time as well in this space of figuring out or trying to figure out who we are and how we can live maybe a more conscious, wiser life. And vertical development is the lens through which I look at these questions in my work. And I do a lot of work in that space here in Australia, just like Julia does in South Africa, and the meeting of the minds and the experiences, and finding this wise woman, and then meeting another wise woman, Makati, who's hosting us today, has just been such a gift. So I'm very excited and just discovering where we go with this conversation. Yeah, that's me.
I'm going to quickly interrupt. Sorry, Julia. So the word that Alice used in one of our meetings was yarning. Yarning. That and maybe you can say a sentence around that is.
It's a word used by First Nations here in Australia to describe dialogue. And the first time I heard it, I thought it's just brilliant. It's such a beautiful image of what dialogue actually does. It's a weaving, an interweaving. So we really hope that this will be a yarn rather than just a two-way conversation. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Julia?
Yeah, I'm based in Cape Town, work with Aephoria partners with Simon and Lucille, who some of you might know. I'm very interested in the inner worlds of people and how you can work with them to stabilize individuals, organizations, communities, and countries. Come from a country with a turbulent history, and I'm interested to explore what these kind of inner world technologies can do in terms of building our nation and, of course, others. I'm also an existential psychotherapist, which means I bring in mad existential ideas like life is shit and then you die. But it provides quite a lot of richness and background, which I love to integrate with the vertical development work, which, as a lot of you know, I absolutely adore and love running vertical development programs in organizations, which we do both in South Africa and globally. So that's me.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And we will jump right into the conversation. And just to say that you are all invited, please, you can land in whatever way you can in the chat, maybe share what it is that brings you to this conversation, this yarning that we are having this afternoon. But also know that at any point I will open up the space and invite your questions in so that we really create that beautiful tapestry, pulling from all sorts of different colors, pretty much like my dress. It's a very colorful matte dress. So that's what we're gonna be, that's what we're gonna be doing, inviting all colors of conversation in order to create a matte tapestry. And to start us off, I will ask one of you, and any one of you, Alice or Julia, can respond to this, but perhaps you can assist those of us who are new to this topic or who would like to hear it again. What exactly is vertical development? And in particular, what is its significance to leadership development? Go ahead, Alice.
I'm smiling because I think all of us working in this space have our own version of what's your 2-minute definition of vertical development. So here's my 2-minute definition. But with a bit of context to that definition, because I came into the research on vertical development from a coaching background. So a lot of growth in my experience as coach happened when people break down. So this whole idea of vertical I found very challenging because it suggests this hierarchy, this kind of, stairway to heaven. And I never felt comfortable with it. So what I came to through the research that I've done is the metaphor of a piano. So if you think of these two types of learning, the horizontal and the vertical, as piano playing, the horizontal development describes the techniques, the tools, the proficiency you require as a piano player to be able to use your body in an effective way to play the piano. So all of the tips and tricks and stuff that you learn technically, that's your horizontal development and allows you to move your fingers swiftly on the keyboard. But then how many octaves you play, that's where vertical development kicks in, because you can be a really proficient piano player and just play 1 octave, and there's only so much music you can make. So for me, vertical, in terms of developmental dimension in human beings, is equivalent to the number of octaves, the breadth of complexity of the music you can make on your developmental piano. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that is such a beautiful analogy. Yeah.
I just want to add that I think the value for me of this metaphor is that it's embedded in it is a reminder that vertical development is not just about pitch, it's about breadth. It's about how many nuances of meaning making can you inhabit consciously. So it's not all about jumping and growing into the next superhuman stage of development where you'll suddenly be so wise and never fall back, because I think that never happens. And a lot of wisdom lies in the lower octaves, just as there is wisdom in the higher ones. Yeah.
And from what you were saying, I'm hearing that there can be some sort of up and down, and that too is part of the learning. That too is part of the expansion of one's breadth.
Yeah.
Anything you would like to add, Julia, particularly around what it means for you at Aephoria? And also you mentioned how much this is your work. This is what is close to your heart, in working with individuals, working with communities, organizations, etc., etc. What is the meaning of this for you? Yeah.
I really like Alice's definition, and I really don't think I can add much to that at all. I'd love to sort of glide over into where I think the value of this work lies, and why I think it's so profound and so right for now, and why we do this work at Aephoria. You know, I can list the benefits that later stage people bring to organizations, and the way they can make better sense, as it were, of complexity, uncertainty, think more strategically, more long-term. But in a way, the two sort of big outcomes, that the big values that we see in South Africa too, the one is when you have a reasonable number of later stage people, they can actually act as stabilizing forces in organizations that have had a lot of retrenchments, have experienced trauma, or in the case of South African organizations who have been through state capture, which is when basically fraudulent bandits take over whole state institutions. And so as we try and bring these organizations back, later stage people, the more we have in those organizations, the more likely we can help stabilize those organizations from the inside. The other really useful thing that this work does is it shifts people's relationship with difference. And this is really important as the world becomes more global, and people from other countries are moving around, and we're looking for not just, we're looking for cognitive, demographic, all kinds of diversity. And we're trying to get these guys into organizations, but often the organization can't cope with difference. It has an early stage approach to difference, which means that the organization can experience difference as criticism. And then all of the bad relationship problems happen and people leave. So this work can help build containers that hold difference better. And so those are the things I love about vertical development, and why I see them as being critical to organizations at the moment.
Right. And so it is, I mean, we're talking about the human within the leader, and how you are appealing to the development of that human in a particular way. Julian, you spoke about the later stage and the earlier stage. Can we explore a little bit around that, around the later stage of development, and the significance of that? And also, how do you work with people to assist them to take that journey towards later development in their selves? I'm sure that's not good English, but I don't care. In themselves, but also in their leadership role. So personally, as well as the role they play. Any one of you can answer, Julia or Elise.
At least you.
Yeah, I was thinking as you're talking, Julia, that it's just interesting. We're almost assuming that we know what we mean by later and earlier, and perhaps it's useful, yeah, just to almost dive into a bit of this idea that human beings continue growing up well after they finished growing physically. They continue growing up psychologically, right? That's so when we say later stage, we mean a level of maturity that allows an individual to do certain things or be certain things. And those things are the capacity to look at multiple perspectives or hold paradox in our minds without feeling like we're overwhelmed, and hence the tolerance, right, for difference. So there is this unfolding that seems to happen. And we know from the research that this unfolding is possible throughout the lifetime, but also we know it doesn't happen. Not every individual goes through all of the potential stages that we have inherent in us as human beings. So I think for all of us doing this work, there's this intriguing question: how do you foster this kind of growth? How do you create environments that actually stimulate it, that create the premises for that unfolding to happen? Yeah, right. Julia, do you wanna?
No, I think that's great. You know, we could give an example of typologies, but I know there are many of them and they all use different names. So I'm thinking maybe we don't be specific.
Yeah, in naming necessarily stages of development.
Yeah. And maybe I can sort of speak a little bit to the role vertical development, leadership development initiatives have with regards to those two groupings of people. So we were talking about sort of more conventionally orientated people, people orientated towards society as it is now. And then later stage people who might have a broader perspective on things, and wondering which kind of grouping is better for leadership development programs. And so just to speak to that, our leadership development programs tend to focus on people at conventional levels of maturity, which is roughly 80% of people. Only 20% of people get to later stage, according to the statistics from Europe and the US. So our programs are good at helping people at conventional levels of maturity mature, and less effective for later stage people if they come into the program, because you know, when the program is targeted to earlier stages of maturity, it doesn't necessarily help late stage people. In our work in organizations, which is largely South Africa, but globally, I think we have like only about 5% of people that come in at later stages. So, you know, most of our work is at conventional levels of maturity. Alice, is your work the same?
Yes and no. I think it's an interesting question around, you know, what you just said then, why a program designed for maybe more conventional mindsets is less effective for post-conventional. So when we say conventional, we mean a bit earlier, post-conventional later. And so my PhD was done in a program like this, where interestingly, I think over 30% of people were scored at post-conventional, but it was a cross-sector, cross-industry program with very senior leaders. So that's a very, we would expect maybe to see more post-conventional. But to your point, what was interesting was that, so the program lasted about 6 months, and by the time it ended, 30% of people had shifted into a later stage, 30% had regressed, and 30% had stagnated. And the 30% who regressed, they were mostly post-conventionals, starting the program at a later stage. And then when we remeasured them, they scored earlier. And vertical development was not made explicit in that program. The program itself was designed to be developmental. And maybe it will be interesting to explore a bit what that means in terms of program design, how we do that. But for me, it was a really intriguing research question and discovery, because I had this assumption that people who were post-conventional would grab that learning, would, do more with it. Useful to say it was in 2020 when all of a sudden that program, which was running annually, went online. People were in lockdown. There was this massive upheaval happening for them as they were going through the program. So plenty of reasons to fall back, as we would say. But still, what caused the post-conventionals to fall back? And part of what I found was that this more complex way of looking at the world that requires a lot of conscious energy and choice to hold perspective, to witness your behaviors, to foster self-awareness, all of these qualities that we would attribute to more mature individuals. So when you're under stress, those are the first to fall off. You lose perspective, you lose capacity, unless there's that consciousness of, I'm falling back. Because after I did the final interview, people finally saw their results after the interview. And some of them reached out and went, what was going on here? Like, why did I score 2 stages earlier the second time around? And then I had a second conversation with those who were interested to understand more. And the stories they shared were all about stress and going into old patterns and just losing perspective. So I think, it's an interesting, how do we, even when we do have our post-conventionals there, how do we create that space where people can actually operate from the stage that they're capable of operating from, instead of going to hiding, as they say in the research, the redefiners in hiding, the late stage people who just don't behave as late stage in the workplace. But anyway, that was a long-winded going all over the place. But Julia,
that was very interesting. So our programs are more conventional people, and some at quite early stages, and our over 182 people that have been through our programs and pre and post assessed. 40% go up at least one stage. Around 50% stay the same, and around 10% fall back. And the fallback, I think it's working from, a group of people who get their first exposure to their inner world. That's our sort of group where we have the greatest impact. Hence the high numbers there. But also in terms of the people that stay the same, I think that, some of the stories we've heard from our participants are incredibly traumatizing. People in this country live in a shocking state. Not just the power, not just the Wi-Fi. I'm talking about crime, social unrest. We had stories of participants hiding in attics in one program to hide away from mobs. It really, really makes a big impact. And, when we get asked by corporates to report on the maturation of people, you really have to take the context into account to understand that. So I suppose we've sort of been covering
I just want to say something on that point, Julia, because I think it's an important one that you just made around cultural contexts in which we do this work, because a lot of my cultural context, or a lot of the context that I do this work in, is with very senior leaders, either in the public or the private sector, but it's mostly there that organizations choose to invest in this type of work, because it's still considered, I don't know, maybe a bit sophisticated or a bit complex or a bit quite expensive if it involves developmental tools. So then for all of these reasons, plus or minus the instability that you're describing, which based on my roots in Eastern Europe, post-communist and communist history, I understand quite well viscerally. but I don't see them here in the same way. So it's a much tamer environment from a political perspective, which I think plays a big role in, what's the source? What's the water in which we're swimming doing this work?
Yeah, exactly. And what is the lens with which we are looking at the development in order to make meaning of what is happening in the inner worlds of people? I think that, I don't know if any of you have done some work around cross-cultural meaning and embeddedness of where people are. Yes, Julia?
Just a quick interruption. I'm just loving Narayan's question. And I think we should think about this. I wonder if anyone uses control groups in this measurement. People that get measured before and after, but don't do the program. Wouldn't that be exciting and interesting to do?
I'm doing my best. I tried to pull off a project like that recently and it didn't work because they didn't want to invest in the tool to measure for people who are not doing the program. But I agree. We need that. We need the control group.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cool. Sorry, Makhat, you can, what were you talking about? Cultural
Yeah. What does it mean? What does it mean? And where is what is the orientation of the lens that we are using in order to make meaning of people's inner worlds? I mean, I'm looking at this room right now, and I can't help but notice that very few people I don't know, represent, certainly for South Africa, a massive cultural difference. Of course, there are within different groups some differences, but you know, when we're talking about 80% of people that we've worked with representing conventional and only about 20% making it, what does this mean exactly? And what does it mean for the people we are working with?
And who are those groups that we're referring to, Makati? That's what you're saying. It's very, very Western and very white, this world work. That is, I think, the truth, because the way it's been run. So I think there's a huge opportunity to actually expand that lens cross-culturally. And it's very Anglo-Saxon too, because it hasn't really been translated in other languages, which is something that I'm intrigued by and really wanting to change.
Yeah. So
Julia,
we try and sort of embed our way of working in the South African context when we work here, or in other contexts when we work elsewhere, but we have the most experience in working here. And there are some things that we put in the program that draw on cultural and spiritual ideas around growth or transformation that we can draw on in our programs. So some of those would be to speak to local philosophers and their ideas around development, engage traditional healers and other spiritual people in programs, work with psychological methodologies that are embedded in ways of thinking, like, for example, family constellations, which brings in the idea of ancestors and how they play a role in our lives. We do try to embed the program locally, and I think that's our main focus. So it can be incredibly varied what we do and what is right for each organization. Some organizations can't tolerate, too much weird stuff, and other ones can. Too many spiritual healers and creative exercises.
Right.
But we do try to embed, and there's something quite interesting about this work, that is that when you look at the maturational process of people and how it's been measured and written up, it follows quite a Western pattern that includes tertiary education and all this sort of cognitive development thing. And, you know, working with this methodology in an environment where people don't get those opportunities in general, that it looks like quite a white elitist type model. And then we started to look at some of the processes that are used locally to build and grow healers and leaders in traditional communities, and found there was a crossover there. I mean, an interesting thing in Africa is the use of entheogens. And when you use certain types of entheogens, it gives you different perspectives, multiple perspectives, all of which are incredibly confusing. And so you have to find ways of making sense of reality when everything is relative. And that kind of speaks to that first post-conventional stage, which maybe in Western context, people get to through book learning. So, yeah. So we have a strong suspicion and need a funder to do this research, any of you, that will show that traditional developmental processes run a similar route.
Yeah, there seems to be that call, that yearning for some cross-cultural research and funding. But we shall not allow that to be a block. And Elise, for you, how do you go about applying vertical development in your own work, in your own in your programs? If you can be specific in offering some examples of what do you do in order to assist people to grow?
I think what has been very intriguing for me coming into this work was that there was a lot of content on the stages themselves and the behaviors, but not as much on how does this growth actually happen? How is it experienced by the individual themselves? And then the follow-up question on that, how do you design programs for this type of growth? So just zooming in on how it happens, we do know that it happens as a result of some sort of, in my work, I borrow a term from Jack Mezirow, disorienting dilemma, or Nick Petrie calls them heat experiences. It's like something that, you know, challenges your worldview in a way that you can't make sense of it anymore, which is perhaps, I wonder, this brilliant, you know, design element that you bring, Julia, in your work. Is it actually creating that disorienting dilemma for people when they're exposed to a completely different way of being that a traditional healer or some sort of other non-cognitive space holder can bring? So there's a readiness element when people come into a program. Are they actually on the cusp of, are they struggling with disorienting dilemmas already? Because if they're not, in my experience, you can embed to a certain extent disorienting dilemmas in the program, but there's a ripeness that has to be there psychologically for people to actually start to inquire more deeply. So that's an element of design, and it can be done in many ways. And I think Julia gave some really awesome examples. And another element of design that has fallen out of research is when people encounter these disorienting dilemmas, some people, and that has been an explanation for me in my research why people fell back or didn't grow, they refuse to feel the nasty feelings that come with the disorienting dilemma. They're called edge emotions. There's a Finnish researcher called Kaisu Malki who studies this stuff, and she came up with this brilliant name for these emotions. So when you're taken out of your comfort zone, when your world doesn't make sense anymore, you feel fear, anxiety, grief, shame, all sorts of emotional pain. But that emotional pain doesn't indicate that something wrong is happening, but actually it shows you that it's growth pains. You're growing as a human being. So I think a big blocker in programs is we create these disorienting dilemmas and heat experiences, but we don't necessarily systematically hold space traditionally for people to process very consciously the edge emotions that arise. Or in coaching, how do we hold space for our clients to process their edge emotions? So this element was absent mainly from vertical development research. Like in Kagan's work, he talks about the subject-object shift and tools like immunity to change. People go through them, but they tend to be quite cognitive. But as they do that exercise, people feel all of these feelings. So what do you do with them? So I've started to actually create small practices to train this capacity in people, to your question. Like an exercise to feel your, identify your edge emotions and normalize them. And then what I found in the research was when people got curious about them, this made the discomfort bearable enough to unlock deeper reflection, shifts in perspective. So you need that emotional space to be wide enough to support the discomfort that follows. So that has become a huge part of the way I go about designing programs now, much more than I ever considered before. I mean, I always, like we all, I think, know that it's important to hold space for emotions that arise in learning, but these are very specific emotions, and there's a very specific thing around being curious about them in the moment that seems to open up something really interesting. Yeah.
I'm just going to read. I'm going into that chat. Thank you very much.
Yes, Simon.
Yeah.
Spot on. You said emotions as a trigger for curiosity. They exist anyway, but we can choose to put curiosity. Curiosity is called an epistemic emotion. We can choose to bring it in or not. And we usually don't. It's not instinctive to bring it in because we don't want to feel this stuff. It's not pleasant.
And
Sorry,
when you
interrupted you, Makati.
No, I was going to say that, then you bring in the role of the facilitator who may or may not be ready, in fact, to be able to hold those emotions. So that journey is taken, in fact, by the one who is being worked with, but also by the facilitator themselves, because it can be quite edgy when we are being triggered ourselves. So, this is a massive reminder of how we can be as space holders, that holding space also creates an opportunity for our own growth as well. Yeah.
I'd love to sort of, I love the way you articulated that, Alice. That was brilliant. And I just want to unpack that into like how you kind of design a program, and what our research suggests around that. So this whole business of learning on own, learning with coach, learning with small group, learning with peer, learning in big group. So our programs have different kinds of components, as yours do too. And we try to do some sort of statistical analysis on what kind of programs created greater shifts. Now, of course, this is a stupid thing to do because it's not taking account the context. So anyway, just bearing that in mind. So we found some interesting stuff, which is that the number of one-on-one coaching events with a good coach makes a real big difference. So if the program is only group work or peer coaching, you're not going to see as big a shift. And I think that speaks to the edge emotions, Alice, that someone can keep kind of helping that person make sense of them. And
I was running that hypothesis in my brain as you were talking. Why does that make a difference?
Yeah. And I mean, it does speak to also like the program will be more expensive, the more one-on-one coaching events you have, but actually more effective and more sustainable, because always, figuring out how to apply it back into their lives. The other thing was if the group work is too light and too theoretical and not stretch enough, then that's also not going to be very helpful. One of the things we did was work on this idea of strategic thinking with a group, and we got in a really slightly eccentric professor of strategy who really stretched these guys. And that stretching also resulted in edge emotions. And we had phenomenal results from that program. So this combination of cognitive stretching, coaching, group work, peer coaching, and then backed up by some sort of learning platform where people could get stuff and show videos at home and whatever. Yeah. And I think the more we're working, the more we're finding our components are fragmenting, the more different types we have, because of this whole online, offline, synchronous, asynchronous sort of world. But actually, it works if you can do like a drip thing over an extended period of time. Instead of the old models, in the old days, Simon, what were the dates? 2019, we used to go and do 3 times 5 days. Yeah, 3 times 5 days over the period of a year, and a little bit of coaching. So those big blasts, we were so lucky. This mining company really liked the work. Now it's become much more drip, with smaller interactions that are less time costly. And that's sort of where our programs are going. It also has something to do with the fact that the programs are becoming more global. So the time together, we have a bit at the beginning where we actually go to the same location, but because of the time zones, you can't have one big session with everyone. And so these practical things start interfering in the structure of the program.
I think it's super interesting you say that, because I think from a developmental perspective, there are really interesting reasons why drip actually might work so much better, right? Because you've got this iterative process through which people will feel those edge emotions, they'll process them, they'll have a shift, they'll have an insight, but then they need to experiment with that insight. And one thing I found was that the people who experimented shifted, and the people who didn't experiment were more or less likely to shift. So if you've got the drip, then you can have iterative experiments where people challenge their thinking, and they go step by step in kind of shifting and growing. And there was one more thing, because you mentioned groups, and I think that's such a valuable thing, or element of design. I noticed in the research that I did that the people who shifted were more likely to be part of the same peer groups. So then I started to look at what were the characteristics of those specific or those particular peer groups. They worked in groups of 5 in that particular program. And those groups seemed to do 5 things. They were different and similar. So they had been chosen under this criterion of diversity, but then they were prompted to look for the similarities and to look for the connections in the way they engage with each other. So they did that. Then they did challenge and support within the group, stuff like calling each other out, holding each other accountable for experiments not done, but in a really honoring the person, like unconditional positive regard kind of way. And the 5th thing was consistency, which bears really nicely with what you were just sharing there, Julia, because then you can't have you have consistency over a longer period of time, and then that starts to bear fruit. So it's interesting for me, this interweaving between the internal process and how we then play with the design and learn from the design something about the internal process, and the other way around. There seems to be this virtuous cycle of learning that happens for us as facilitators, designers.
And how long are programs, Alice? Like how many months do you work?
They're growing longer here too for me, and I'm advocating for longer programs. So I'm doing more year-long programs, and I'm entering an 18 months program now, which I'm very excited about, because I do believe the longer, and it's very drip, as you were saying, small interventions, time for experimentation, and embedded in the workplace. So it's not removed from what people are doing. And in this particular case, it's a whole organization. It's an NGO. The whole team is going through it. So it's going to be really fascinating to see what happens to their culture. It's not a big organization. It's about 35 people. But it's a nice laboratory to learn and for them to experience something different.
Wow, sounds fascinating that. So you're going for over a year. I mean, that's great.
Yeah, 18 months.
That's amazing. So that is amazing. What we find is it's probably 1 out of 4 programs we get the 18-month idea. A lot of the time they like procurement cycles and all sorts of procurement things and processes and this is and that's is that interfere in the time span. That they don't interfere. We have to work within the client constraints. So let me not be disrespectful there. And so sometimes we've had programs that have been pushed down to sort of 8 months, which is short to show maturation. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to invite questions from any of our participants, our guests, if anything has been sparked for you, or comments even, anything that you would like to share over and above what is in the chat. Yes, Jake?
Hey, thanks so much. So happy to be here with you folks. I really appreciate the opportunity. Wonder where you folks see this field going. It seems to me that there is a growing interest because this kind of development really does seem to help people operate in more complex environments. And there seems to be growing awareness of that. But I still have a sense it's still somewhat of a niche field, but I feel like it's going to blow up in a good way. Fingers crossed, but I'm just interested to know what your folks' perspective is on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Jake. Any of you can jump in. Julia, you're unmuted, so.
Oh. No, I didn't. I'm not on mute, am I?
No. I'm saying you're not muted. So go ahead.
I see so many applications. So many applications. I can only see this field growing and developing, and I see it in terms of nation building. I see it in terms of how jobs are constructed. I would love to see business schools like they did Boston Carroll, implement a sort of a developmental program that runs parallel to MBA programs or EMBA programs. I do feel like it's really taking off and there's a huge amount of interest. It's still at its early moments. And so it's going to explode. And what is fascinating, and I think it was you, Narayan, who said, like, they've been doing this stuff in Scandinavia for a while. Is that right? It's just, we're just getting going on it in Africa and the US and UK. The Scandinavians have been working developmentally for years. So there's quite a lot of knowledge there that we could use. Yeah. Lise, what do you think?
Just one, I absolutely agree. One other thought that I have is what I'm sensing is that we're starting to cross-pollinate between the different schools of thought within the field as well, which is something that really excites me. I feel it's baby steps and there's still a lot of protectiveness around this theory or that theory and people swimming in their own lanes. But this, for me, is something that really, really drives me. So when I created the Vertical Development Institute here in Australia, the main intention was to help be one of the cross-pollinators, because I think there's so much wisdom happening. And on the edges of our field, like from transformative learning, Kaisu Malki, whom I mentioned, she's in transformative learning. She doesn't really care necessarily or is concerned as a researcher with vertical development, but she found something that is so useful for us. But I didn't find it in developmental literature because we're kind of swimming in our own lane. So I love this, what I'm feeling, and even collaborations between organizations that I'm seeing more. I've got friends from, like Julia is such a great example, but there are other people doing this type of work and we're starting to talk and collaborate. So that's something that it's a hope and something that excites me at the same time, and a fear I have at the same time, because if we don't do that more, I don't think we can have the impact that we're hoping to have.
Mm. Mm. Gosh,
Mm.
yeah. So thank you for that. And one of the questions or fears that I have, or something that I constantly think about, is around how we hold the future as it is bringing about the AI, and here we're talking about how do we do this thing of being human, and already we are moving towards something else. And I mean, I know we have few minutes left, but anything that you would like to bring in, and
Yeah.
then I'll give you, Kate, a moment.
You know, I'm sort of writing something that has really reinforced this idea that in order to help people be more human, they have to do it with others. That in that Ubuntu sense, we are human because of others. And interestingly enough, Esther Perel, I was watching her the other day, and her husband, who is a trauma specialist, they were talking about rehumanizing people. And Esther was saying, in the old days, we thought that like if we were single, then we must go and like prepare ourselves, get ourselves totally ready for relationship, and then launch our ready-made item out into the world and find a partner. And what she was saying was, no, it doesn't work like that. We have to go and we have to develop in relationship, because other people tell us who we are. And so when we look at the AI world, it can only provide some answers. It cannot necessarily humanize us. We need other humans for other roles. And when you look at my research on stuckness, one of the reasons why humans stop growing is they lose others. But that's another whole lecture. I'm going to leave out of this conversation.
Yeah.
But it's rehumanizing people through this process.
Right.
And we might need more post-conventional thinkers to be in charge of AI and how it's deployed, because I think we need wisdom more than ever before.
Kate,
do you wanna?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's only 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yes, go for it, Kate.
Such an interesting discussion, and that was exactly my question. I think I was sitting with your stat on South Africa, Julia, that there's more trauma, there's a tougher context, and so people can't move as much. And how do we design for that? And then my thought went to AI, because perhaps more one-on-one support is needed to hold people in the South African context anyway. And perhaps AI, while it's not going to work transformationally, but perhaps it can offer something there to enhance programs. And so I wondered your thoughts on that.
I'm having a lot of fun with AI and using it as a kind of source of inspiration of thinking. And, our assessment also uses AI. Just on that trauma thing, and it's coming to your doorstep quite soon, just so you know. So we are actually working on building a methodology to kind of create a trauma-informed leadership style, process, way of being, which is critically necessary in the South African context. So that's going to it's coming, exactly where it's coming to you soon. There's that thing. And then the other thing is, our sense is that it might be, if people are hurt in community, they might be better healed in community. And so sort of switching between these one-on-one modalities and group modalities. In traumatized organizations, often it's kind of traumatization in groups. And so maybe better healed in groups. But, the complex trauma thing in South Africa is you don't know what you're going to uncover. And so you must have both, because how trauma pops in South Africa in an unexpected way. So thank you, Kate, for that lovely question.
Thanks, Julia.
And it feels like a big provocation that I'm definitely going to be walking away with. Thank you very much. And that'll be all that we have time for. Gosh, I sound like one of those TV reporter people, but it really is all that we have time for. And what a rich conversation. And it feels like just the beginning. Because really this being human is a massive invitation for all of us. So thank you for this conversation. Thank you everybody for showing up and for bringing in the gems that you have brought in. Julia and Alice, maybe a word from the two of you, one at a time, to bring us to a close.
Just gratitude from me. Gratitude for this group and for the opportunity and for nerding out with you all. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Be a
Julia?
copycat. I don't want to be a copycat. I am an original thinker. I just want you to know that. But really, all I feel is gratitude and gratefulness that some of you got up early, some of you didn't go to bed early, and thank you for your questions. I wish we could have had more discussion. And thank you for that. Thank you, Alice.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. We have to think where to take it from here, to Narian's point here.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So, and for now, good night, Alice. Have a good night.
Thank you.
And the rest
Off to
of
bed.
us, wherever you are in the world, have a beautiful rest of whatever it is you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Makati, for holding space for us all.
Pleasure. Such a pleasure.
Thank you. Just
stop the recording.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.